compensation. Thank you for making some time to join us today. My name is Michael DeRamio. I'm the Assistant Director for Energy and Climate Equity at NYSERDA, joined by my colleague Lisa Romero, also part of the Energy and Climate Equity team. Again, thank you for making some time to be with us this afternoon. As everybody gets settled, we are just going to invite you to introduce yourself through the chat function on the webinar. And to follow the format that's shown here. So if you're familiar with using chat and Webex, you can already get started, but I can tell you it's on the bottom right hand side of the screen. There should be a little chat bubble that allows you to enter in your information here. So we're going to ask you to just type in your name, your pronouns, as well as any affiliations with an organization or particular part of the region of the state that you'd like to enter, and then also answer very briefly what you're hoping to learn during this webinar. So please feel free to enter that information in the chat. This will give all of us a sense of who's in the room together, just given we expect quite a few people here today and want to support that, but given time constraints, won't be able to have everybody introduce themselves verbally. Just a reminder that you can see here that we are, this webinar today is really informational, and we are going to be inviting you to submit comments to the request for information via a specific form that's included in the announcement by April 7th at 3 p.m. Today is really a time to answer any questions that you may have about the RFI as you're considering what comments you would like to submit. Today is, we recognize that many of you have just received these documents. We don't expect you to have read them all prior to this webinar, so no need to worry about that. The purpose of this webinar really today is, honestly, is a new approach that NYSERDA is taking to be as open and transparent as possible about what we are planning and how we can be so that we can be responsive to communities. And so, we are going to be explaining the intent with the compensation mechanisms that we're proposing today so that you can be informed and have your questions and have that as you reflect on and consider what you'd like to respond to the request for information, how you would like to respond to the request for information. So, again, if you're just joining, please do enter the information here into the chat box so that others in the room can get a sense of who else is in the room. But I will continue, and you can, as people come in, are welcome to add that information as we go here. So we can have that. Okay, great. So using Webex, so for those of you that may be less familiar with Webex, as I was just mentioning, there are certain tools at your disposal here to interact with us and with others in the room here, the virtual room. So in the lower right-hand corner, you can access the participants. You can see that little on the gray box on the bottom of the screen here that with lines pointing to what each of those buttons allows you to do. I mentioned the chat just a moment ago, that little bubble. You can also see other participants in the room. And etc. So, yeah, so to raise your hand, you are, although I believe we are, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, are we going to allow audio or are we just ask? Yes, we are. Okay, great. So to raise your hand, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, that little raise hand icon in the second number 2 there on the screen, you can see that little hand image. You click on that, and that'll let us know you'd like to speak, so that we can keep everybody muted until somebody is ready to speak. And then one of us on our end at NYSERDA will let you know when you are unmuted so that you can speak to the group. So our agenda for today. Our intention here is to, as I mentioned a moment ago, to provide a space to share a little bit more context on our intentions with engaging differently, more meaningfully with uh, disadvantaged community stakeholders. We recognize that uh, state policy has not as frequently, not meaningfully or adequately engaged with community stakeholders in developing policy and programs. And so we're looking to do something about that. And in part through the compensation mechanisms that we're going to speak about today, that Lisa and I are going to speak about today. So we very much want to hear from you. Welcome any questions you have. Again, the focus today, though, is on clarifying that context and answering questions, clarification questions about the request for information regarding 2 specific ways of being compensated for engagement and with working with NYSERDA, which Lisa is going to speak more about. So we're going to have the bulk of the meeting today, or the webinar today, focused on providing that overview on our end, and then the majority of the time for questions and answers about that. And then we'll end with clarification around the next steps and what we see as the timeline for putting these compensation mechanisms into place, so that we at NYSERDA can engage in this way. So let's see. Before we get started, just a few community agreements that we would ask and ask everybody here to adhere to. The first is that there is one mic. Obviously, we are controlling that here just to keep the environment conducive for dialogue without distractions. So please do stay on mute unless you are speaking. Ask you to consider the principle of 3 before me. So this is the idea of making space for others to talk if you've already spoken. So if you ask a question or make a comment, and maybe soon thereafter have another question or comment, we just ask you to, on your own, to look at others speaking, a few others speaking before you raise your hand again. Want to clarify that this meeting or this webinar is being recorded to ensure that all questions and comments are captured, and we can be transparent about that and reporting out from it. We will ask you to hold your questions until we get through the overview presentation. However, that you're very welcome to enter questions in the chat along the way, and we'll be sorting through those and doing our best to be responsive to those as we go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Romero, to give us that overview presentation.
Thanks very much, Michael. So once again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lisa Romero. As Michael said, project manager with the Energy and Climate Equity team. I did see the registrations, and I may have worked with some of you previously when I was on the events management team. So I'm so thrilled and honestly quite privileged to be in this position to work with you in this new capacity. So I wanted to let you know that we've done an extensive amount of due diligence in trying to craft these 2 compensation mechanisms with quite a bit of internal stakeholder feedback. And now we want to present to you what we've come up with. This is by no way, one and done. This is a process that we look to you guys to help us inform. And just to reiterate, I know there was some confusion with the documents that were put out. As Michael said, we do not expect you to read everything before this webinar. We had thought that hosting this webinar would be a very good way to, as Michael said, provide an overview, allow sufficient time for Q&A, and really want you to know that we want to do more listening than anything else. We don't know it all, and we're looking to establish relationships that are more than transactional. So this whole compensation, compensating stakeholders is part of a broader stakeholder engagement. And we're really looking, because we understand that we can't do this without partnerships with community-based organizations. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of a background. And yes, so explain. So now the request for information is the document that we prepared to solicit feedback specifically, again, on the compensation mechanisms. So we have an RFQL, which is a request for qualifications that we're looking to establish, and that's really geared towards community-based organizations to service us in particular areas that we've lifted up. The second path is an honorarium, and this is really attributed to the leadership here at NYSERDA. We were asked to create a secondary compensation that's quick, right? That we don't have to, we've heard from our communities that um, there's little capacity, that we need to provide some other options. So this was our effort at creating a very simple mechanism to solicit kind of input on one-offs. So if we needed to get a perspective from a DAC representative, a program team can solicit that rather quickly without going through a lot of contractual obligations. Again, these are both kind of new areas for us. Well, not the RFQL, but the compensation is. So we're looking for you to help us decide if we're on the right path, what we can do better, and especially the information we're looking for regarding accessibility and language. We realize we have a long way to go, and we're really making great strides to try to improve that. So with that, we'll go over the process, the timeline, we'll answer questions, and again, want to reiterate, um, I know it was a little confusing, and I apologize, because the actual documents that were posted on NYSERDA's webpage, the RFI summary is really the one, 4 to 5 page document that kind of gave an overview of the process. And within that document is the feedback form link. There was some confusion because we received quite a few emails that the link, the first document appeared first, where it says apply online, and it asked for feedback, and it was kind of out of order. So that's something that we're aware of. We apologize for that discrepancy, and we'll do better the next time. Next slide, please. Next slide. So again, just to provide an overview of the process, as you know, about 3 years ago, the Climate Act was passed that mandates at least 35% of the clean energy benefits are directed to disadvantaged communities. NYSERDA is striving to make that 40%, and we're using the definition that is provided by the Climate Act, which you can find on our website. NYSERDA has an interactive website outlining the DAC criteria as it currently stands and the geographic location of those. So that's a great resource to use, as that's what we're going to be using in determining who lives and or represents disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. So clearly, we recognize the role that public policy has played in perpetuating inequities faced by historically marginalized communities, and its critical role in addressing the climate crisis, energy injustice, and the legacy of environmental racism. Next slide, please. In order to respond to that, NYSERDA is developing an equitable engagement strategy, centering the experiences and expertise of disadvantaged communities, including lived experience, in order to accomplish the Climate Act goal. A key component of that strategy is compensating stakeholders representing disadvantaged communities for their time and expertise engaging with NYSERDA. This is not new. This is something we've heard over and over. We've also heard it with the CLCPA. That's the working group, sorry, the Climate Action Working Group. We've participated in webinars, so we've heard that this is something that communities need, and obviously we need your expertise, and you should be valued and paid accordingly for your time and expertise. And that's what we're looking to change with this process. Next slide, please. So at a very simple, high overview level without going into all the details, I want to make the distinction between the two paths that we're proposing. So the first, what we're calling the stakeholder services pool, is the request for qualification. It's that pool that we're looking to set up. And the second is the honorarium path, the more seamless, quick, think of it as less deliverable time work. So the stakeholder services pool is really geared directly for community-based organizations. That's the first distinction. The honorarium can be used for both CBOs as well as individuals that may not be affiliated with an organization. So think honorarium organizations and individuals, stakeholder services pool just organizations. The second distinction, the pool would be for longer term engagement activities, more extensive, timeline delineated, think consultative services, input, participation in working groups, and other kind of deliverable-based program activity. The honorarium, short, single instance, where we need to tap into some stakeholder expertise. That's how we're designing this. The honorarium would not require any kind of contract. It would literally be just a one-page form where you're attesting that you are an expert, you provide the service, and then you get paid. The stakeholder services pool, as anyone who's worked with NYSERDA, oh, I'm sorry, can you go back? Okay, so for anyone who's worked with NYSERDA, it is a contract, right? So it's a contractual agreement. We would set it up as kind of an umbrella agreement. So we would have organizations who would apply to the pool. If you are approved, you would be part of this umbrella contract, which we intend to have for a 4-year period. So once you're in, you're in. And then that pool of qualified experts would then be tasked by program teams or support teams who want specific work. They would assign a task work order along with the appropriate funding, and we would work to make that happen. Again, more long-term engagement activities. The honorarium, again, simple, one type of interaction, fill out a form, get paid. Next slide, please. For the pool, we are basing compensation based on the budget rates that are submitted, including any subcontractors that you might be teaming up with. For the honorarium, we're proposing a flat rate structure. Again, the idea is to keep it very simple, so it would be a flat rate payment. And finally, for the pool, we've allocated it into different service areas that we've identified are the areas that program teams have said there's a need for in working with representatives of disadvantaged communities. So that's a very much more structured approach. And the honorarium, there are no service categories. If you have expertise, in an energy-related matter, whether it's housing, transportation, and you can attest to that, we would then pay you. It's also important to know that we are trying to set this up so that it's from an equity perspective, we're looking at it to give everyone a chance. So we would kind of assign work as needed to make sure what we've heard is, don't make it the usual suspects, don't go to the same people. So we're trying to not do that by establishing a system where we would give everyone kind of a chance based on the expertise and the geography being sought after. Again, it's important to know that these proposed descriptions are just that. We're proposing that now, and it's subject to change based on the input that we received from this request for information. Next slide, please. So very specifically, this is where we really need your help. We're really looking for input in these particular areas for the draft RFQL. So eligibility criteria. We'd like your feedback on the service areas that we've proposed, the requirements that we've currently listed, accessibility, and by that generally, does it make sense? Is our wording confusing? How can we do better to reach the harder to reach geographies within New York State that we're striving to attract? And any other general feedback, including what your opinion is of even the term DAC, or even what we're calling the stakeholder services pool. We're really trying to make this responsive to your needs. And then finally, we would like you to indicate on the feedback form if after this informational webinar and after reading the materials, you would be interested in applying to the RFQL once it's finalized. Again, that would just help us from a planning perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, and the other area that we're really looking for your input is on the proposed flat rates for the honorarium structure. So you'll see within the RFI, we have some flat rates that we've proposed, and they're based on the timing of the meeting. So 1 to 2 hour, 3 to 4, 5 plus, as well as what a flat fee would cost just for a short-term engagement. Again, any feedback you can provide will really help us inform that opinion better. And we have done, quite a bit of research, both internally using our uh, current solicitations and doing a contract rate analysis against the various titles. It's not a perfect system, but we did come out with a range. So we want to vet that against what we hear from you guys. Um, okay. Now, as much as we love to accept all the comments via the chat, but really, again, like Michael said, this is kind of a new territory for us. So we really would prefer you share your comments through the chat, of course, but really encourage you to use the feedback form that's included as a link within the RFI summary document, because that way we can gather all of the questions and comments, document them, and make sure, most importantly, that we're responding to them. That also is due by April 7th at 3 p.m. Please know that any information that you provide would not be considered confidential. Um, it will be aggregated, and we'll share the summary and plan to post that on NYSERDA's webpage. The identity of people will not be revealed. And one of the things that we're looking to do differently, just so that you know, we've heard that NYSERDA should share information not only on the information that we have received, but maybe the reason why we haven't incorporated that. So we're going to aim to do that as well in our response on the website. Next slide, please. And then in full transparency, want to let you know how comments will be used. So we may call upon you or reach back out if there's a comment or question that you have that we're curious to explain further or to learn more about. So I hope you're open to that. At the end of the comment period on April 7th, we will collect and review all the responses, summarize them as best we can, and again, include how those comments were incorporated or why they were not, and post it to our website. And then the feedback that we receive from this exercise will help inform the final solicitation for the RFQL that we plan on having and the honorarium separately. Also want you to know that we will have a separate webinar for the RFQL once that is launched. So if we don't have time to get into, and we shouldn't really use this for the specifics of the RFQL, there will be additional time set for an additional webinar. And also please let us know in the feedback, do you think 1.5 hours for a webinar is good? Is the time of day, does this time of day work for you? Any kind of information you give us will really help us make this the best user experience for you. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just kind of a rough timeline. So here we are, March, well, we released it on March 22nd. Today is the 29th, and we're having this informational webinar. The RFI comments will be due April 7th. Our hope is to take the feedback, incorporate it, revise the RFQL, and then launch it back at the end by April. I know it's very aggressive, but we really have an action bias to kind of operationalize this. So think April, May, we will launch the revised RFQL. We do plan on having it out on the street for 4 weeks. And then thereafter, we'll also finalize the honorarium mechanism, and then we look to have everything back out on the web by May, with hopefully having this fully operationalized, I would say end of June, probably more like July. Next slide, please. Okay, wow, that went fast. So sorry, I talked a lot. I'm going to pause now for question and answers. Again, just to remind you, you can type in your question in the chat. You can raise your hand. And we really would like to hear your own voice and your perspective. So if you'd like to do that, raise your hand, and our colleague will unmute you and let you know when you're ready to speak. And with that, I will pause for questions and answers.
So we have 2 hands raised in the webinar environment.
Yes, go for it. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat from, so please, yes.
Just 1 second. Kwasi, you are unmuted.
Yes,
Please go
thank
ahead.
you for this. My name is Kwesi Frazier, Business Development Director of Green Power Tech. When you say this would be operationalized in July 2022, how long is the engagement period following that?
Thank you for the question. So if I'm understanding you correctly, when you say how long is the engagement period, how long will the contract be for?
Correct. The
Yes,
contract. Mhm.
absolutely. Thank you. So it would be for a 4-year period. So we're looking, so if you would qualify for the pool, the agreement would be right through 2026, December of 2026.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
I'll just clarify too, Lisa. So just to be clear, you know, the intention would be to enter into those agreements, but the work itself would be, you know, those would be we call $0 agreements at the upfront. But basically, you'd enter an agreement, but then as work is needed, then you'd enter into specific work scopes or task work orders in order to you know, work with a specific team on something that there's an opportunity to work with them on.
Thank you,
Exactly.
Michael.
So it's not continuous, it's based on task orders.
That's
That's
right.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Leslie, you're unmuted in the webinar environment. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Leslie Braxton. I am a principal of Trahan Architects, and I'm representing Designing for Democracy as well. And my question is, are there specific projects or locations that are being considered for engagement within this process, or will that be part of the process to determine which communities should be engaged?
I can, Lisa, would you want me to take a stab at that? Yeah, I can't tell if you're looking for your mute button. Um, yeah, Leslie, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think so. Really, the way I think about this is we are building building the space, building the agreements to work differently, work meaningfully with community stakeholders on with our various program teams across NYSERDA, as well as even non-program teams that around specific initiatives to ensure that our work to build an inclusive clean energy economy is effective and really well informed by community stakeholders. So this effort here is really to establish those agreements so that we can do that type of work for a variety of programs and a variety of ways to inform, again, really state level planning. Less so working on a specific project, let's say, that's out in a particular community that is looking to, you know, that needs really community input. That would typically happen through our program, our program funding. You know, if more at the state level, thinking about that, if there really are gaps in how we're approaching and doing our programs, designing our programs, et cetera, that's really the kind of engagement that we're talking about here. So it's really I started recognizing that we need to have a way to engage more meaningfully with community stakeholders at NYSERDA, our planning efforts. So as we're developing new types of initiatives, new programs, or trying to refine existing programs and policies, et cetera, we know we need to be informed by those that understand communities best, right? And so this mechanism is meant to help inform that state level planning.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you.
If folks who have asked a question wouldn't mind lowering their hand, that will help if we are able to see if you have a fresh question to ask. And in the meantime, let me unmute Chris. Chris, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris Whitehead with Enviro Sciences. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about the source of the funding for the compensation pool. Is it through state fundings, or is this an issue of developers paying into a general pool and then have it allocated to the stakeholders?
Sure, Chris, thanks for the question. This is Lisa. So funding would be from NYSERDA. So for the initial RFQL, there is no funding attached to that. As we said, that's a standard umbrella agreement. But what will happen is as program teams identify a need to engage in the type of services that we're establishing, they will then bring their funding for their respective program teams, and that will be negotiated throughout the task work order. Does that help answer your question?
Oh, yeah, it does.
Okay.
Just one moment. Allison, you're up next.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Martinez from Brooklyn Level Up. In reading the draft proposal, I wanted to know whether or not the section that states that proposers who had already previously had contracts with NYSERDA, how their prior experience and obviously approval of whatever proposals they'd put in the past would affect other people who had not, had any experience contracting with NYSERDA presently, whether or not there would be some transparency that would show us, a point scale or however that experience would weigh in to factor into whether or not you would be contracted. And then also if they're on the back end, if NYSERDA would provide some reporting on the demographic breakdown of groups that actually do get rewarded after they're in the pool.
Thank you, Allison, for that question. So let me see if I can recall. So to your first question, you talk about speak to the fact of existing contractors who may have existing work with NYSERDA and their ability to apply for the pool. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, since they're already eligible for this, how does that prior experience factor in or weigh into the evaluation process? And whether or not that's going to, if there's a point scale or something so people could see what weight you're applying to prior approval experience, which obviously if you're trying to increase the pools of people, of organizations that can participate, they wouldn't have that prior contractual experience with you.
Sorry, so sorry, Allison. So yes, I was just so right now our scoring rubric, it's in draft form. I'm just waiting to see if legal might want to weigh in here.
Yep. Hey,
Because
Lisa. Laura here.
hey, Laura,
Hi.
thank you. I just don't want to
Yeah.
misspeak here.
Yeah, no problem. I think, and I will apologize. I don't have the scoring rubric pulled up in front of me, Lisa, or what we're
No, it's
thinking
fine.
about, but it would only come into play if we've laid that out in the evaluation. So I'm not sure if we put in the evaluation criteria, whether or not prior experience with NYSERDA is going to be evaluated. If that is in the draft RFQL, then that doesn't even necessarily mean though that folks are getting points for that. It really is just coming into play of like, have we had a positive experience with them or a negative experience with them? I don't think we typically do not assign points to that. And so you don't get extra points if you've contracted with NYSERDA before. And given as you indicated, the intent of this RFQL and wanting to engage with folks that we haven't worked with before, it's not our intention to give points to folks who have worked with us before. And I think there was another part of your question too that I'm missing, but I can't remember it. Do you mind just repeating the second part of your question?
Sure, no problem. The other question was, once you have the assigned pool membership established, if NYSERDA would provide some transparent reporting about the demographics of who received those contracts.
I think that's something that we can take into consideration. And you know, so we can jot that down and think about putting out. I'm sure there's some type of report that we could release on that. But we will think about that. And if there's like specific things you would like us to capture that you would recommend us capturing that report, you know, please submit that to us so that we can see that.
Will do.
Thank you so much, Laura. And
Would you like to continue with the raised hands?
sure, Michelle, thank you.
Diana, you're next. I'm unmuting you. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. I am Diana Williams. I am from Adopt Clean Energy, Environmental Leaders of Color, and from Comrie Enterprises, and we're located in Mount Vernon, New York. I wanted to know, in selecting CBOs, must they be nonprofit organizations, or can they be for-profit entities?
Sorry, I wanted to make sure you had finished your question.
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I can tell you no, the CBOs do not have to be not-for-profits, and they can be for-profits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I do want to address that that was a huge consideration in our development of this, because we did hear from stakeholders who said, please do not make a non-profit, you know, don't make it a 501(c) requirement or not-for-profit. And we recognize that there are others also working in marginalized areas of the state, that whether they're in MWB core or they have other qualifications, that they should be allowed to participate in this, not just because they're for profit. So that was a huge consideration, and I hope it's one that is pleasing to our stakeholders.
Yeah, and again, I'll just emphasize, this is all what's being proposed, but we very much welcome, that was one of the bullet points that Lisa spoke about eligibility. So if you have any further suggestions about, what we should be considering and how we should be either limiting or expanding the pool, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to the next hand, we have Summer. Summer, you're unmuted in the webinar environment. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Summer Sandoval, and I'm the Energy Democracy Coordinator at Uprose, located in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. I have a few questions. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the eligibility structure and how, CBOs in disadvantaged communities are being prioritized. I want to know if there's a cap in terms of the number of CBOs or participants in the stakeholder services pool, and then wanted to get clarification as well. I heard that you said that the opportunity would be open for weeks. Are you considering a rolling structure? And then in conjunction with that question, is there any kind of dissemination plan in terms of being able to share this opportunity with groups, with nonprofits, with CBOs across the state, to be able to have the right voices around the table? And then very lastly, if you could talk a little bit more about the compensation structure and kind of like the formula or analysis that went into informing that structure. Is that consistent and on par with some of the other rates that NYSERDA is paying other private technical assistants and consultants? Would like more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Summer. And bear with me, because I am going to have to ask you to enumerate those again as we go down. But let me try to respond to your first question, if I may. If you can remind me, you asked, was the first question pertaining to the cap on the service areas, or was
Yeah,
it?
eligibility, about a little bit more about like the eligibility criteria and how NYSERDA is planning on really incorporating and prioritizing CBOs in disadvantaged communities. I think that would it's definitely a concern, you know, that I was going to ask about the definition that's being used for community-based organization. I think it is a little bit concerning that it is open to for-profit organizations, and how NYSERDA plans to prioritize community-based organizations, you know, that are not profit driven, that are, you know, really accountable to disadvantaged communities in this process.
Sure. Thank you for clarifying. So yes, the eligibility that we used, we actually, let me respond to your first question. The method that we are choosing to prioritize under-resourced and underfunded CBOs is based on a budget threshold that we included in the RFQL draft. That was also based on precedent that we had received from DEC. They had similar environmental grants that they did, and this was criteria that they included in theirs. So we chose that, and part of that eligibility is that we would give preference to community-based organizations that have an annual operating budget of 3 million or less. That's not to say that we would exclude others, but we want to give preference and priority to those CBOs that meet that 3 million or less threshold. And that was one of the things that we had picked up from the DEC precedent. The other, in regards to how we defined community-based organization, I do understand the concern there. We also we got lessons from the hub solicitation that went out, that Lori Clark and Bianca Shaw, our colleagues, worked on. And so we used to try to be systematic in the feedback that we got pertaining to that solicitation experience. We try to use the same description, the same definition for community-based organizations that we use in the hubs, and we actually use the expanded definition after we had gotten some feedback. So that definition, just so that I can be clear and share with everyone. I'm sorry, bear with me. Okay, so we're using the definition for the purposes of this solicitation. This is what we're proposing, that a community-based organization refers to a public or private organization aimed at making desired improvements to a community's social health, well-being, and overall functioning, and is representative of a community or significant segments of a community, and provides services to individuals in the community based on input from community members. Again, that definition is consistent with the revised version that was used for the recent Regional Clean Energy Hubs solicitation based on stakeholder feedback. So that's why we landed on that. Does that answer that question, or do you have another follow-up pertaining to that?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, and then I'm sorry, if you can repeat your other questions, and Michael, feel free to jump in here as well.
Other was about the timeline. Wanted to get clarification on the timeline in terms of how long this opportunity would be open, because I thought I heard 4 weeks, but I wasn't sure. I want to confirm on that, and if there were any plans outside of the RFQL webinar for sharing this opportunity with communities across the state.
Yeah, thanks, Summer. So 4 weeks, you did hear that correctly, and I hesitate even in sharing that. Here's the situation we're at, and this is feedback we'd like to hear from you. What would you consider, writ large, the public who's on the phone now, what would you consider a reasonable amount of time to have something on the street? We know that 6 to 8 weeks is ideal. The challenge that we have is we also know that there's a need to operationalize and to really get into practice some of these compensation mechanisms to begin to do the deep work that's necessary to reach the Climate Act. So we actually we're hoping to launch this sooner, but again, based on feedback, and we wanted to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, and we're happy to consider extending it further out. We're just mindful to try to put something together that works. There are also other program teams who have initiatives pending the establishment of this pool for co-design efforts in some of the service areas that we've listed. That's why we're kind of sticking to 4 weeks, but that is certainly subject to change. And I understand the need, your question and concern about how are we sharing this more broadly with other communities. And that is something that we can use help with and we can use more time with. So, and actually, I would share with you, Summer, that one of the service areas that we currently have listed in our RFQL, it's public outreach and inclusive outreach for this type of thing. Helping us identify some ethnic media that we could be using, not just relying on our Salesforce or campaign list to reach communities. Considering multiple language solicitations and allowing for submission of solicitations, not online because not everyone has access. So very real questions and concerns, and we want to address them in the best way that we can. So we look forward to your helping us inform some of those decisions through the RFI as well.
Yeah, and I'll just,
Oh, sorry. I was going to say thank you for the information. I guess I wanted to see, like, after that, I understand, I guess, the priority to like get this on rolling. After the 4 weeks of this, would there be like an ongoing, like, quarterly or open, like, it would be rolling in that sense, where if you miss the first cohort or the first application, you can still access this opportunity?
Yes. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
that's exactly what I was just gonna, so thank you. Yeah, so I think to Lisa's point, we're eager, and we know a lot of community organizations we've spoken to are eager to engage. And so we want to get this, we're doing this process now to make sure that how we're thinking about it is clear. I'll just say too, this hopefully won't be a very onerous request here when we actually release the request for qualifications. We very much, and that's why we included the entire draft. We want to hear from you if you think, we hope that most of the information we're asking for is readily available, and that the way we're asking for it will be easy to submit and allow us to create this pool so that we can start engaging. But the intent is to have this be something that we would, after this initial phase, this 4-week period that Lisa was talking about, and once we establish the initial members of the pool, the stakeholder services pool, that we would then, we'd absolutely be able to reissue or accept on an ongoing basis proposals for others to join the pool over time. So we'll have a set period of when those decisions will be made in order to then, allow others to join the pool. We do imagine that happening on some regularity, let's just say.
And then one more point on that too, Summer, is we did make a decision not to put a cap on any of the service areas at this time. Again, just based on volume and kind of response, we want to see, what comes back. So there's no cap initially planned. And as to Michael's point, we will do this kind of rolling or open enrollment, again, based on volume, but probably, once every 6 months, again, subject to change based on kind of the input that we receive.
And I just want to, well, first check if Summer, if that answered your question before I see some other questions in the chat here.
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Okay, great. I just want to respond. I think Georgina asks about our groups or individuals who are not formally registered eligible, and that is as we are proposing it. Yes, I think Lisa mentioned this before, around, can be nonprofit, doesn't have to be. So we are, that is part of what we're looking at is organizations, community-based organizations of all kinds, grassroots and grass tops, more established organizations maybe that, so yeah. And then the individuals piece, really that's related only to the honorarium piece that Lisa was saying, which would be for a particular meeting. Yes, that we're inviting feedback, and we were looking for individuals and organizations from diverse communities to really help inform an effort that we have underway, an initiative or program co-design, et cetera, any of those types of things that individuals could be engaged around an individual meeting, if that was, there was an opportunity there. The pool really does require an organization to work with, just from a legal and contractual perspective here at NYSERDA. But they, whether they're formally registered, they don't necessarily need to be a 501c3, for example, as a nonprofit. They could be housed within another organization, or a private entity that's, as long as, I think, like it was said before, our interest here and all the questions that we ask are in the interest of, is there accountability to the community? Is there a principal focus on serving a disadvantaged community? And ideally, are they based in a community as well? Or are they based in one of those communities? So we're trying to have as broad an umbrella as possible while ensuring that, focus on those community organizations that are focused on serving and ensuring benefits for disadvantaged communities. So I don't know if that answered your question, Georgina, but feel free to raise your hand if you had a follow-up on that.
We have a hand raised if we'd like to go in that direction with the question
Yes,
and answer.
please.
Shwani, you're unmuted in the webinar environment. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. This is Chuan Yiji. I'm from Georgia Tech, actually located at Georgia, but I used to work at RPI. So we have worked with NYSERDA and also New York State utilities. We continue working with them. My first question is, when you mention stakeholders, do you have any examples in mind? The second question would be, when you involve disadvantaged communities after the first phase, for example, they tell you the needs and all that. So what would be the subsequent steps do you have in mind to continue involving disadvantaged communities after they get funding, for example?
Thank you so much for those questions. I'm sorry, can you repeat the first question again for me?
Yeah, sorry. The first question
No, it's
is,
fine.
who would be the examples of stakeholders you have in mind?
Thank you for that. Yes, right, because that's a very broad term, right? Stakeholder. For the purposes of the solicitation, we're looking at stakeholders as that very segment of New York State's populations that often have not had their voice at the table, those who are marginalized and historically excluded. So for the purpose of this solicitation, I would say, our disadvantaged communities are our primary stakeholders. One of the reasons why we settled on calling this stakeholder services, because this is a body of people who have not had traditionally their voices have not been impactful in the policy decision-making process. So we really wanted to narrow down the focus on that particular target audience. That's not to say that we don't have other service providers and others, policymakers as part of that stakeholder services, but the target population that we're looking to engage with to do this type of work reside with the community members who live and experience this on a daily basis. So I would say that that's our primary target audience in this particular pool as our stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's very innovative.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You went in and out for me.
Oh, I said it's quite innovative. I thought initially stakeholders would be the ones who would provide funding, for example, to help disadvantaged communities. So this is actually for disadvantaged communities themselves, right? I think that's really great.
Thank you.
Georgina, you have your hand up, I think, for a follow-up question. You're unmuted. You can please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon again. Sorry if I'm losing my voice. As a volunteer in my community of Brownsville, I find that a lot of persons would be interested in participating in their communities in different ways, but the supportive services, like, for example, to fill out the forms, to get the groups organized in a way that they can complete even the application process, because a lot of persons aren't necessarily experienced, to go about this. So I'm trying to find out if there'll be supportive services available for persons who need such. Also, for ongoing processes for persons who do get funding, will there be supportive services to help them along with the implementation of the project?
Sorry, would you mind repeating that just one more time? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Clearly?
I can hear you.
Yes. I'm asking if one of the drawbacks to communities such as Brownsville is that persons are interested in participating in different areas and avenues to benefit their community, but the application process is often a stumbling block because persons are inexperienced in how to put together these application forms. So I'm asking, will there be supportive services to support persons or group of persons who want to apply to implement projects in their neighborhood, such as empowering women of brown and dark skin in non-traditional employment, or will there be supportive services as the project is implemented to support these groups?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point and I think we recognize that there's a need to build capacity in communities to be able, as you said, even to respond to opportunities like the ones NYSERDA puts out. I would say that if I'm understanding your question correctly, and as I was mentioning earlier, the focus of this pool specifically is really on engaging community representatives and those serving disadvantaged communities or frontline communities, those communities on the front lines of the multiple crises that they face from energy, health, housing, etc. How can we create a way to engage more meaningfully with NYSERDA in developing programs and initiatives at the state level? What I'm hearing from you is, the need to build capacity in communities to inform what's happening at the local and regional level and take advantage of workforce opportunities, et cetera. I would say that while there may be opportunities in this pool to, like Lisa mentioned earlier, some of the services may be around outreach and engagement. We need to establish this pool as the starting point to then broaden that reach that we're talking about. I'll also point to the regional clean energy hubs, which are currently being reviewed. The proposals for those are being reviewed, and we expect those to be online or stood up and in operation later this year. That those hubs really a big part of what their mission and purpose and function in each of the regions across the state is to really engage like in the ways that you're talking about. How can we reach communities that haven't had that voice, make new connections, ensure that they're aware of what's being planned in the region, and have a way to engage and benefit from those projects. So we are looking to those to be that to be a two-way street, right? The work at the state level and the work at the regional and local level. So we want to support that, but we sort of we're building a foundation right now through this pool for us at the state level to partner with community-based organizations that are able to work with us and build out that reach. over time, and including through informing what's happening through the hubs, for example. So I hope that answers your question, but I would just say that the degree you have comments along those lines of how we can ensure that we are engaging the right mix of organizations, that we are able to lower the barriers for community residents themselves to participate in various project planning, et cetera. We want to hear about those opportunities and consider those as part of what we're doing here. But did that answer your question, Georgina?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
I can take us. I can. I think there's another question in the chat around the federal bipartisan infrastructure law. We are, right now we are. That's unknown. We are in the process as a state in seeing what resources will come down to the state level and. So I can't say for sure how that will play out here. I will say that the pool that we're establishing here is meant to be NYSERDA wide for NYSERDA wide use. And that is for all of our programs. We are looking to establish this as a resource for various initiatives, including any funding that NYSERDA currently administers and any additional in the future funding. As we said, we're talking about the next 4 years with multiple opportunities for entering the pool and partnering with us to establish that agreement with us, and then to have opportunities for engagement and really distributing the opportunities across the pool as much as possible is our goal. But this pool itself will not be administering project funding. It is intended really for compensating for the, like Lisa mentioned, the lived experience or the expertise from having served communities for many years or for even a few years, bringing that expertise and resource into and front and center in working with our various teams here at NYSERDA to develop programs and that have their own funding, et cetera, associated with them. Does that answer the question? I think it was Quasi. Does that answer your question, Quasi? Or if it doesn't, please feel free to raise your hand.
Wait, Michelle, do we have any other raised hands at this time?
I can actually say it because we do have Georgina who has a raised hand, but Michelle's screen is frozen, so I don't know if she can unmute her.
Sorry, I should have taken it down.
Oh, I can interject. I actually have my hand up again. I just following up with what Georgina asked, actually kind of wrote about this a little bit in my response, but what I wanted to know in terms of the capacity building and equity work, if there could be like the development of like a template or a resource library of successful applications so communities can get to see what those look like. Does obviously you could redact out for specifics, to, keep whatever company's information that needs to be kept private, but that way that they can get exposed to what those things should look, a full and complete application should look like. And then going forward in the capacity building, providing access to sources for language interpretation, be it other accessibility issues with hearing or Braille, anything like that, as well as what I know we try to do in our organization, but it should be done at the state level when there are these opportunities for these projects, is providing mentorship to those organizations to help them get fully formalized and incorporated, to help them build the structure and governance that they need to be able to actually fully serve and fully be able to take advantage of other opportunities as they may present themselves. And it could be that it's interagency, connections that will help, hey, did you know that this other agency has this program that's available that you could participate in? Or these are some trainings and educational pieces that might be a resource so that your ongoing and mentorship and growing as your organization is participating in this. Those are the things that would make a difference to communities in the long haul.
I can't thank you enough for that feedback, and please, please do put that in in the feedback form. You hit on so many things that we have been listening and hearing about and learning more about, and that's a very simple um, another solution to how we can help CBOs who are under-resourced. Even potentially, yes, gathering our resources and working with other program teams such as workforce development and tying in and making those connections and other interagencies. If there's an issue that's raised that NYSERDA can't necessarily address, why not bring that to the appropriate and respective agency to help build up the capacity of our community? So I really do appreciate that feedback, and we just encourage you to please put that in the feedback form.
I will.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll absolutely take into consideration the examples idea. I think we also received some questions prior to the webinar too, unless there's other hands raised right now, or while we're looking at if there's other hands raised, questions coming in. There was a question around if this is the first similar type or the first type of services pool that NYSERDA has looked to establish, or has there been any prior like this? And to my knowledge, NYSERDA has many what we call contractor pools for engaging in different technical services to support our work. To my knowledge, this is the first that we have established that specifically focuses on frontline and historically marginalized communities and engaging with focused on those communities, engaging in informing our work at the state level. We have programs that are out, like I mentioned, the hubs, and prior to that, we have community energy engagement partnership or a community energy engagement program where we've worked out in communities and engaged with communities over many years. We have had Green Jobs, Green New York, et cetera, where there's been work with communities in a deeper way. But this is the first that I'm aware of, and Lisa, I think in all the research that you've done and that we've done here collectively, that is focused in this way, focused on a pool specifically of community-based organizations with the specific purpose of working with NYSERDA and state level policy program planning. So that's one question. I don't know if there's other hands raised though.
So Michael, Michelle can't see the hands, so I think probably the best thing is to move on to the written Q&A and see if there's anything in there. She's having some technical issues that are a little bit harder to solve than we're figuring it out.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else on the team can see the hands. I can't because I'm presenting, but I'll go to the next one on that was submitted prior. It mentions that in our request for information that the request for qualifications is expected in April of this year, and it asks, does NYSERDA have a target start date for any resulting agreement to dictate the fast turnaround, or is that still more up in the air? Lisa, I think you spoke some to this earlier. Just that there's lots of efforts underway and opportunities for working with NYSERDA to make sure that we are engaging frontline communities in the development of our programs and funding opportunities. And so, especially as we've actually helped, a lot of this was shaped with many stakeholders that we met with over the past few months. About 30 different organizations provided some input. And then we have this opportunity now to further inform what we're doing. Our intention here is to have something available so that we can establish these agreements with an initial, hopefully large pool that we can build out over time. And as was mentioned, I think we're looking at, likely every 6 months at least, that we'll have an opportunity to add additional organizations to the pool to work with us. So we hope that, but again, this is part of what we're asking for right now is, the trade-off here is more time and further opportunity for input means, further down the road, maybe until this is available to actually engage with NYSERDA. So that kind of input is very much welcome as part of the RFI, and would ask you to submit any comments along those lines in the form that we've been mentioning. Okay, so I would, just encourage if you do have questions and your hand is raised, just given our technical difficulties, which is unfortunate here, but if you wouldn't mind entering those questions into the chat box, that would be helpful so that we can make sure we get your questions addressed today. Okay, I'm getting the signal that we do not have any raised hands right now.
Okay, and I would say for the sake of time with the last 14, 15 minutes we have left, Michael, maybe we want to go to the next slide. So hopefully we've answered some questions, and we are happy to answer more after this webinar. So please continue to submit your comments and feedback, again, through the feedback form link in the RFI summary document by April 7th. And please also share this broadly with your organizations, individuals, anyone in your networks who you feel might have an interest in this. We are really trying to broaden the tent here and bring in all interested parties. So we appreciate your help in promoting this on our behalf. Next steps, again, so after the April 7th comment period, our intention is to review the feedback, incorporate it into the RFQL where we can, where it's appropriate, prepare a summary of the responses, and again, why we may have included something, why we may not have addressed something, and post that to our website. We will then look to finalize both the honorarium mechanism and launch the revised request for qualifications in April, May, with again another informational webinar to follow. And just to Michael's point earlier, I do want to go back and just really again encourage. We really did include the full transparent draft. There's no hidden language. What you see is what we're planning on proposing, and we just want to make it better. So your input will help inform that. And to Michael's earlier point, I know that 4 weeks is not a huge amount of time, but what we're hoping is that the requirements that we've included in this RFQL are what we hope to be pretty minimal, and those that most people can meet. So again, if that's not the case, and if you have other feedback, please do share that with us. But our hope is really that between a budget sheet and stating what your expertise is, that the documents required to submit a proposal would be relatively easy to meet. And then finally, a recording of this informational webinar will be made available as soon as practicable. We do have to, read the transcript, edit it, make sure everything's right, work with our marketing team to post it. And those on this webinar will be notified of that when that happens. I'm just going to pause again if anyone has any last minute questions or clarifying questions. Again,
Yeah,
go
Lisa,
ahead.
we do have actually a couple questions from earlier that I think we, or at least one or two here, that we might not have fully addressed. So just want to take the time now if while people are thinking about their questions around next steps. One is around the rates that we are proposing for both the stakeholder services pool as well as the honorarium. Are they based on private consultant rates amounts? Lisa, do you want to take that? Because I know.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So, so what we did was we took about 13 to 14 existing solicitations that we have, and NYSERDA does have an internal kind of process that we use. It's called a internal contract rate analysis, where we do take the titles that have been submitted for various RFQLs or RFPs, and then there's a chart, there's a whole graph, and we compare them comparatively across titles. So we did an analysis of about 13 solicitations, and of course not every title is exact, but we did try to land on the corresponding titles of what we think a CBO, so an executive director or some other framing of that language, program manager, program director. So we took about 3 titles for each service category and did an analysis of that, multiplied it by the number, and that's how we came out to the rates that we're proposing based on that exercise.
Yeah, and I'll just suggest that in the stakeholder services pool, that's part of the information we're requesting is what rates are for the organization, so that what your standard rates are, so that can be actually more customized in the stakeholder services pool and responsive to potentially a variety of different roles and needs that come about. There's a follow-up question that was around if the stakeholder services pool covers the time and capacity that it requires to prepare for a meeting and post-meeting working activities that fall outside of the specific meeting times. So Lisa, I'm not sure if you want to take that or I can.
Can you repeat that, Michael?
Well, I'll just take a stab at maybe trying to answer it. So it's really around whether or not the preparation time prior to a meeting and maybe even follow up to a meeting is factored in. And I would say with the honorarium, that's what we want. Yes, I think we're looking to keep that as simple as possible. So there's no contracts involved with an honorarium. It's really a reimbursement as long as you complete the form and meet the criteria. We are proposing again that would be a flat amount with that would include any prep time that might be needed, although we wouldn't, I think it would generally need to be mindful of that and potentially look at the different levels if there's, for any reason, a more involved preparation needed. Yeah, that now as far as the stakeholder services pool, that would be an hourly rate. So that would include any preparation, as well as participation in meetings, as well as follow-up and maybe outreach that's needed. Anything that kind of is called for in that task work order would be compensated on an hourly rate basis. That's different than the honorarium, where we're looking at more of really limiting it to meetings and single opportunities for input that are relatively short, very short term in nature, fairly quick response, not very high level of effort type responses. So we're really trying to make a distinction where we can then justify a simpler, standardized reimbursement, much like we use for other ways of we have honorariums at NYSERDA for other purposes, and that's generally the format to keep it simple and consistent. I hope that answered that question.
Just a reminder again that we are having some technical difficulties. So if anyone does have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're not able to see a raised hand at this time.
There's a question here from earlier that I want to make sure we answered. When you involve disadvantaged communities after the first phase, what would the subsequent steps in mind to continue involving those communities after they get funding? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I would say that with any of these, especially in the stakeholder services pool, if we're working with an organization, part of that task work order could include engaging with residents, let's say, in a particular community, in a focus group or other format. Again, I want to make a distinction between the work of this pool and this work we're talking at the state level, and make a distinction between that and any local project work or local engagement, locally focused engagement work that we are really trying to position the hubs as the space for that work. State level NYSERDA planning, we could work, we part of what we're proposing as part of the stakeholder services, some of the activities is that outreach. And that could be part of the task work order of a particular effort, is to engage in various stages of the design and implementation of a particular program. That could be earlier, needs assessment, to then elements of a program, to then implementation and evaluation. All of that, those different stages could be part of a particular task work order or work with a very particular program team at NYSERDA. I hope that answers that question. There's a question here about what size or revenue is the cap for a private company to participate. You indicated 3 million or less for a nonprofit budget. That was not just for nonprofits. We are looking at and to be clear, that is not a cap. We are proposing that we're trying to, it's equity, right? We're trying to help smaller organizations have a be more on equal footing with larger organizations and qualifying for this pool, so that we can work with smaller organizations and medium and larger organizations. So there isn't a cap per se, as much as what we're proposing as a additional points for organizations that have smaller budgets. And this gets to one of the questions asked earlier, just around building capacity. We're really looking to build capacity of organizations that haven't historically had the resources to participate in the way that we would like, or that they would like. I'm seeing some another basically I think a comment here, and Lisa, do you see that from Allison? Again, I think this is great input. We definitely want to take it all into consideration. And again, the purpose of the call here today is just to clarify what our intentions are and why we're doing this and what is being proposed, but would really ask that you submit comments just like yours, Allison, here in the form around recommending what we include and how we structure, etc. Because there is an opportunity now through April 7th to share your suggestions, your recommendations, so that we incorporate or consider that as part of what we finalize in what gets released in the next month or so.
Okay, Michael, so we do have 1 minute left, so we will be wrapping up. Is there another slide, Michael? I'm sorry, or is this the last one? Okay, great. So please, as Michael said, continue providing all of your comments through April 7th via the feedback form. Share it with your networks. If you have any other questions regarding this RFI, please do use our public engagement at NYSERDA.ny.gov email address with the subject line RFI 5082. And we'd love to continue responding to questions to gain the kind of input that we're seeking. And you have I'm Lisa. You have my name and Michael's number here, so feel free to reach out. We hope that this was informative, and we really look forward to your feedback. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thanks to the team for the technical support, and everyone who really made time from their day to join us here. We do look forward to continuing our work together. And with that, we will end our recording and bid you a good afternoon until we meet again. Thank you so much. Bye, all.
Thank you.